Hi all, this is your Professor Ian. This is just a quick update for week 5 of your Intro to Mythology course. Week 5, we're turning the halfway point. We're getting to the Iliad this week, which is one of my favorite texts from the Greek tradition. Maybe my favorite. Well, no, I like the plays better, but my favorite, other than the plays, is probably my favorite. The Iliad's great. We're going to be reading about the greatest well, maybe not the greatest. Heracles is probably the greatest, but one of the greatest Greek heroes, Achilles, this week. So there's a bunch of reading to do. I've chosen 4 books from the Iliad to read. So please do give yourself enough time to go through that. I just say that because I noticed, last week with some of the just a couple of the perusal readings, there was a bit of a drop off in some of the participation, and there was only about 10 videos for the flip grid. But yeah, I know it was a long weekend and everything, so just stay strong, keep reading, all that kind of stuff. So last week, I've been through your presentations. I looked through all those; they were all great. So good job on that. Um, I have yet to go through the written component. I'll look at that at some point this week, probably not till later this week because I have some other stuff to mark for my other class, but I will get to those. But the presentations were great, so great job. So now you've all had a chance to use Wakelet a couple times. We'll use it again for your term paper, which is coming up in a few weeks. I'm going to post the instructions for that this week too, so take a look for that. As to the readings last week, it was all about the great 4 heroes of Greek myth. And I don't want to make it seem like there weren't important female figures. I talked about some of that in my video lecture, but they're just not the same kind of body of myth about Atlantia and the Amazons and Cassandra and such. They play a lot of them, such as Cassandra plays minor roles in the in other myths or plays like Agamemnon. The play Agamemnon, she plays a role, but she's not definitely not the protagonist. She's an important figure, but a lot of these figures are not the protagonists of myths in their own right, or they're protagonists of some myths and they kind of drop off. They don't have the same kind of body of work behind them like the big 4 we looked at last week. And part of that, as I talked about in my lecture, is last week is due to the way the Greek want to remember or thought about heroism, right? Heroism was for men in their society, right? It was definitely what we would call a sexist society, right? A patriarchal society. Men controlled things. Men were the heroes. Men were in charge, right? That is Greek society for the most part. I mean, there's all kinds of fascinating gender things that are happening in Greek culture, but it's definitely what we would call a patriarchal society, much more than our own, in fact, which is our own is still fairly patriarchal, right? So, anyways, that's what we looked at last week, the big 4 heroes. It's I love reading through your comments on perusal because there's so much going on in their stories that is forgotten and not really talked about, right? Like Heracles. There's so many stories about Heracles. He is like the big Greek hero uh, of myth, and he didn't start immortal. He, the Disney version, he is an immortal, right? He's the son of Hera and Zeus, right? But the real version of Heracles, he's actually born half mortal. He doesn't become immortal until he dies, and he's brought up to Olympus and made into a god. He ascends to true immortality. He's the only hero who does so in that way. So that came up in the perusal conversation. I just wanted to clarify about that. Heracles does become a god upon his death, and he achieves immortality then. One other thing I wanted to clear up with the perusal thing too. A couple people were asking about Ovid. Ovid was a Roman writer, a very important Roman writer of mythology, especially. That's the word I was looking for. We're not reading from him, but if you're interested, his book Metamorphosis is his most important work, the one everybody knows him for, and it's super fun. He tells his own versions of a lot of the myths. That's where you get the version of Medusa, who's been assaulted by Poseidon in the Temple of Athena. He's the one who kind of made that story, that version of the myth famous. And then he tells a whole bunch of other really fun myths and his own take on some of the myths, and and so on and so forth. Of course, he's using the Roman names, so you like Minerva and Neptune for that story instead of Poseidon and Athena. But it's just the same myths being told by many centuries later than what we're looking at. We're looking at the kind of archaic tradition of Greek myth right now, so much older than when Ovid was writing, but he's still working with the same material, telling different versions, and it's fascinating to compare the two too. So if you want to continue your education in mythology, you should definitely read Ovid. We're not getting into it this semester, but Ovid should definitely be on your list. It's super fun too. It's super entertaining stuff. So I would strongly recommend it. As to the stuff we were reading last week with the heroes, I just wanted to kind of tie things together to think about, again, how the similarities in these stories. All four of these big heroes have these big adventures where they go out into the world, and they have to defeat some kind of monstrous foe, right? Some kind of like non-human enemy that they have to engage with, and they have to come back and benefit their society, right? So it is all about this kind of like civilization quest. Heracles is especially good for thinking about this with the 12 labors, right? And all the 12 labors is him going out and defeating some kind of wild beast, or cleaning up the stables, right? Some people were surprised by that one. It does seem kind of beneath the greatest warrior of Greek history, this demigod he's never been defeated by anybody in physical combat. His death only comes about by trickery. He's tricked into wearing a poisoned cloak, and then even chooses his own form of death, right? Because he's dying and it's very painful for him, so he chooses how to die. But he's never been defeated in physical combat, and for him to, one of his labors to be to clean out some stables seems kind of low. But at the same time, it's all about bringing like civilization and order to chaos. That's what all these quests are about with the heroes, or at least that's one way to read them, right? It's all about the human hero going out and defeating this monstrous other, this non-Greek force, right? This is going to become especially important next week when we get into the Odyssey, and I'll talk more about this, but this is definitely something that we see in the Odyssey. The Odyssey is all about Odysseus visiting different places that are not Greek, and encountering the monstrous and having to defeat them, and it's all about encountering the other, right? The society or the group of people which is not us, right? So it's this kind of, essentially, I guess you'd call it xenophobic, I guess, or like Greek-centric kind of reading of the universe, right? So for the Greeks, everybody who's not Greek is inherently, a little bit not fully human in their way, right? So this is what you see with with all the hero stories, right? All the big four hero stories, especially them going out and slaying the monstrous other, right? Medusa, Minotaur, the dragon, and the Jason fights, many of Heracles' enemies, right? So it always involves this civilization narrative in all these heroic stories. So, anyways, again, this week we're getting to the Iliad, which is a different take on heroism, because they're not fighting the monstrous other. They're fighting basically their cousins, right? The Trojans. They're kind of similar people. They have the same gods. They have the same understanding of the universe. So it's a very different take on that. But hopefully the discussion of heroism last week is setting us up for a discussion of heroism this week with the Iliad. So this week there is the usual kind of workflow. There are with 4 perusals, readings to go through. There's a bunch of readings, video lectures. I put some material from the translation of the Iliad that we're using from the Chafee Library. Feel free to read those and use them as resources. Those are for your own benefit, so don't feel like you need to go through every word, right? But if you don't recognize a name or a place or something, you can look it up in the glossary that's provided in the module. And you should be reading from the synopsis, because we're not reading the whole of the Iliad, so you should read the synopsis for the books that we are not reading. And just taking a look here, as usual, there is a flip grid and a reflection to complete this week. As well, like I said earlier, I'll put the instructions for your term paper up so you can start thinking about that as well. Okay, thank you. And email me if you have any questions or concerns.